I remember the fog settling over the highway like a thick, silent blanket. The kind of fog that swallows headlights and makes every tree look like it's leaning closer than it should. I was alone, the engine humming softly beneath me, and the radio only gave off static between songs. Somewhere in the distance, a pale light hovered among the trees, blinking almost like it was breathing. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the world outside the windshield became shapes and shadows, whispering against the edges of my mind. I slowed down, heart catching each time the light flickered closer. There was something unnatural about it, something not quite human, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The silence of forest pressed in, and I felt a pull, as if the mist itself was guiding me toward it. Every instinct screamed to leave, but curiosity had me frozen. And then, in the corner of my vision, I saw a movement that didn't belong, limbs bending in ways that no one should be able to bend. That's when I saw it. The highway stretched empty beneath the night. Fog curled along the edges, thick and slow, like it didn't want to pass. My hands rested lightly on the wheel, knuckles white, though I wasn't gripping hard. A light flickered in the distance. I blinked, and it was closer than it should have been. The trees leaned inward, tall shadows stretching across the asphalt. Branches scraped together in silence, yet I could feel them moving, almost watching. The tires whispered over the damp road. Each rotation soft, hollow. The radio buzzed. Static at first. Then words I almost understood, like fragments of my own name. I leaned in trying to hear, but it dissolved into nothing. Another flicker. I turned my head slightly, just in time to see the light leap forward again. It wasn't a car or a deer. It didn't belong to anything I knew. The fog thickened around the wheels, curling up in fingers. I thought I felt it brushing my ankles, brushing against the tires, alive in its own quiet way. The air tasted damp, metallic. My breath fogged in short bursts. The road bent sharply ahead. Shadows bent with it, slithering over the asphalt. I blinked. The shadows were closer now, closer than before. The radio hissed. Soft whispers, barely there. At first, I thought it was the wind through the vents. Then, I realized I wasn't alone in the car. A presence, subtle, shifting. I didn't see it, but I felt it. Something moved just behind my shoulder, or perhaps beside me. I dared not turn. The lights flickered again. Every time my eyes closed for a moment, the distance seemed to shrink. Each blink was a small betrayal. The forest seemed to pulse around me, slow, deliberate. Branches brushed the roof. Leaves rained down silently, only their shadow marking the landing. The fog hissed at the edges of my vision. I could feel the moisture on my skin, cold, sticky. The headlights caught shapes in the periphery. Tall, thin, wrong. They vanished when I tried to focus, but the feeling stayed. They moved with purpose, patient, always watching. The highway seemed longer now. The bend stretched further, the dark deeper. I pressed lightly on the pedal, but it made no difference. Time had slowed, or perhaps it had stopped altogether. The whispers returned, now clearer, sharper. Fragments of words, names, a laugh too soft to place. I realized my heart wasn't racing yet, but my chest felt hollow, as if it were listening too. The fog thickened again. It rose like a living thing, curling along the tires, wrapping around the car. I could hear it moving inside the metal, rubbing, shifting, breathing. I swallowed, my throat dry, tasting something faintly bitter, like rust. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing at first. Then, in a blink, a shadow flickered there. It didn't belong to me. It didn't belong to the road. It just was. I exhaled slowly, tried to steady the wheel, the breath, the pulse in my ears. The light ahead flickered once more, brighter now, almost pale, almost human. I pressed forward. The fog parted just slightly in front of the tires, but the feeling stayed. The whispers, the closeness, the quiet promise that I wasn't alone. The highway stretched on. I drove, eyes half-lidded, listening to the whispers curling around me. The shadows shifted behind the fog. The lights flickered, and I wondered if they had been there the whole time, waiting. The forest pressing around me. Branches arched overhead, tangled, dark. The ground beneath my feet was soft, damp, smelling of moss and decay. A movement caught my eye. High above, a pair of eyes reflected the pale moonlight. They didn't blink. They didn't look away. I stopped. The leaves rustled softly, though the air was still. Each footstep I took felt heavier, louder, yet the forest remained impossibly silent. More eyes appeared, glinting, small, round, and too perfect. They followed me as I walked, slow and patient, tracking my every move. I blinked, and the pattern of trees behind me had shifted slightly. A low hum rose through the branches. I couldn't place it at first. It wasn't from above, not from below. It was all around me, vibrating in my chest, settling in my bones. I tried to call out. Softly, my voice swallowed almost immediately. The path had changed. Where I thought I had come from no longer existed. The trail bent subtly, as if it had never been there at all. The eyes stayed, motionless, but alive in some impossible way. I could feel them weighing on my back, pressing lightly, though I dared not look. The forest floor was uneven. Roots snaked across my path like waiting hands. Each step crunched softly, muted by the thick layer of moss. I realized my own breathing sounded too loud, too deliberate. The hum rose slightly, a vibration in my chest that seemed synchronized with my pulse. I stopped again. The eyes didn't waver. The trees bent slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if leaning closer to watch. I heard something else then, a soft shuffle behind me, but no wind stirred. Leaves fell without sound, yet the sensation of movement lingered, like warm breath against my neck. I forced myself to keep walking. The forest shifted imperceptibly with each step. Every turn seemed familiar and wrong. Each blink carried a new angle, a new formation of eyes in the canopy. A pale light flickered briefly between the branches, not enough to illuminate, just enough to hint. A shape moved with it, or perhaps the light itself moved, teasing me. I couldn't look away, couldn't stop walking. The ground dipped slightly into a clearing. Mist had settled low, curling like smoke, brushing my ankles. The eyes followed still, though now higher, close to the branches that creaked without wind. I realized I could no longer sense which direction was safe. The humming grew louder, soft, low, almost melodic, though not entirely pleasant. It seemed to originate from somewhere just above, just beyond reach. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it lingered, vibrating through the bones. I blinked. The trail had subtly shifted again. I was farther from the edge than I remembered. The eyes, they weren't just observing. They were waiting. A breeze, cold and damp, brushed my neck. Leaves shivered above, though the air was still. I caught glimpses of pale shapes moving, fleeting, just at the edge of vision. Each blink, each shift of light, revealed something else I couldn't fully see. I slowed, footsteps barely brushing the ground. The hum softened, lingering like a warning. Shadows shifted between the trunks, thin and deliberate, stretching toward me in impossible angles. The canopy opened slightly ahead. Moonlight fell in scattered beams, pale and trembling. The eyes blinked once, an unnatural motion. Then they were gone, but I felt them still, filling the space around me. Coiling, waiting, I realized the forest itself was aware, listening, breathing, watching. The path reappeared, or perhaps it always had been there. Mist wrapped around my ankles like cold fingers, tugging lightly. I stepped forward carefully, following a trail that might not exist. I kept walking. The eyes had vanished from sight, but not from presence. Above, the branches swayed slightly, though no wind moved them. The hum lingered, a quiet reminder that I was not alone, and perhaps never had been. And in the distance, somewhere beyond the bending trees, I heard the softest whisper of a name, a single syllable, almost drowned by the wind, or maybe the lack of it. I swallowed, kept walking, because stopping was not an option. The fog hugged the ground tightly. My boots sank slightly into the soft earth as I walked, each step muted. The trees leaned inward, their shadows long and thin, stretching like fingers over the trail. Ahead, A gas station emerged through the haze. Broken windows, rusted signs, pumps tilted at strange angles. It smelled faintly of oil and something older, metallic, forgotten. I stepped closer. A faint echo followed me, like something dragging softly across the concrete. It stopped when I paused. A swing of a hook, a small metallic clink. I blinked. The tools hanging from the walls swayed slightly, though nothing else moved. Not a leaf stirred. Not a breeze passed. A pale figure appeared behind a shattered window. It was tall, thin, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. I caught only a glimpse, and it vanished. Yet I knew it hadn't moved far. The hum returned, low and metallic. It vibrated under my feet, rising in resonance with my heartbeat. The whisper of steel brushing steel lingered in the air. I wanted to step back, but my feet remained frozen. The fog seeped through the broken doors, curling like living smoke around my ankles. I could taste it, cold, damp, faintly bitter. It clung to my skin, dampening my hair, settling into my clothes. Another metallic whisper. Closer, not random, deliberate. Tools swinging in rhythm, though nothing touched them. Shadows twisted along the walls, and my own reflected and fractured glass seemed delayed. I pressed my hands against the cold window. The glass rattled lightly under my palms. Inside, the shells gleamed with a light that shouldn't exist. Everything was pristine, untouched, lifeless, except for the feeling of watching. I heard a soft scrape beneath the floorboards. Not loud, but deliberate. A rhythm, like steps pacing slowly, waiting. The pale figure appeared again, at the edge of my vision. Just a glimpse, nothing more, but enough to make the skin crawl. I exhaled slowly. The air inside tasted metallic, thick. My ears picked up the faintest echo of a voice, whispering in fragments I almost recognized. It might have been my name, or something close enough to trick me into thinking it was. The fog shifted, curling upward through cracks in the walls. It moved like it had purpose, like it was aware of my presence. A chill ran down my spine. My breath fogged in front of my face. Another glance at the shadowed windows. The pale figure lingered just long enough to be remembered. Then it was gone. But the emptiness that replaced it felt heavier, oppressive. The metallic hum rose slightly. I felt it through the soles of my boots, resonating through my chest. A door creaked somewhere inside. Nothing moved beyond it, yet the sound implied intention. I stepped forward. Concrete crunched lightly underfoot. The whispering grew softer, subtler, curling into my thoughts. A cold presence pressed at my back, almost tangible, almost warm. I glanced at the tools again. Hooks swayed gently, in rhythm with a pulse I couldn't identify. Shadows stretched along the walls, moving against the light, always just out of focus. I blinked, and the pale figure reappeared behind the broken window. Closer now, or perhaps I had moved closer, without realizing. The fog thickened at the edges of my vision. It swirled into the cracks of the building, the broken glass, the rusted metal. It whispered, hummed, tickled the hair on my arms. I wanted to leave. I wanted to step back into the forest. But something drew me forward, a compulsion, soft and subtle, like the hum itself had decided I should not retreat. I stepped closer to the window. The floorboards beneath me shivered imperceptibly. The shadow behind the glass leaned slightly, unnaturally. I blinked and it vanished, yet I could still feel it, in the cold metal under my fingertips, in the echo of the tools, in the hum that resonated through every nerve ending. I swallowed. The fog rose around me, curling tighter. I stepped back slowly, each movement deliberate. The figure did not return, but the sense of being watched persisted. I walked away. The abandoned gas station faded into the mist. The metallic whispers lingered in my ears, and in my chest, the pulse of something unseen kept time of my own. The highway bent sharply into night. Fog clung to the asphalt, curling like smoke around the tires. My hands rested lightly on the wheel, waiting, listening. The road ahead shimmered, a ripple in the dark, subtle, almost like the asphalt itself was breathing. I pressed forward slowly. Each rotation of the tires met a soft, hollow resistance, as if the highway were alive. Trees leaned inward, Their branches stretched over the lane, dark fingers brushing the headlights. A shadow moved between them. I didn't see it clearly, but I felt it, patient, deliberate, watching. The air was damp, thick with the scent of pine and wet earth. Every exhale fogged instantly, curling into the night like smoke. The hum of the engine felt distant, muted, swallowed by the quiet that pressed around me. The asphalt rippled again. I blinked. When I looked, it stretched slightly forward, unnaturally long, bending in ways roads shouldn't. Each time I blinked, the bend seemed closer, closer than it should have been. The shadow between the trees shifted, a movement too slow, deliberate to be accidental. My chest tightened, but I didn't breathe too fast. I tried not to draw attention, though I had no idea what was watching. The fog thickened at the roadside. It coiled around the tires, brushing against the car, curling in soft fingers that lingered after I passed. The cold air pressed against my skin, wet, sticky. A faint metallic tang lingered in the mist. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing, only fog and dark shapes stretching across the horizon. Then a flicker, shadows leaping in the corner of my vision. I blinked, and they were gone. The road seemed to pulse under the tires. Each ripple rose and fell like a chest inhaling and exhaling. I pressed my hands against it, almost willing it to stop. But the rhythm continued, slow, steady, alive. The trees leaned closer. A soft rustle of leaves, though the air was still. Branches scraped lightly against the roof. The shadow watcher between them, unseen yet unmistakable. I slowed. The headlights caught shapes at the edge of the fog. Too tall, thin, stretching just beyond the natural, like the trees themselves had grown limbs to watch. I couldn't look directly. Looking made them sharper, closer. The fog twisted, curling around the tires, licking the asphalt. It pressed against the wheel, against the hood, against the cold metal of the mirrors. I could almost hear it breathing. Another ripple in the road. I exhaled slowly. It was deliberate, organic, wrong. Each ripple carried a pulse that matched my own heartbeat, or perhaps forced it. The shadow between the trees leaned slightly forward. It didn't move like a person, not like an animal. It simply existed in the wrong way, between the fog and the asphalt. The air hummed softly, low, resonant. I pressed my palms lightly to the steering wheel. The vibration ran through my arms, into my chest. I swallowed, tasting metal and pine, damp and cold. I blinked. The bend in the road seemed to stretch even further, impossibly long. The fog thickened at the edges of vision, swallowing the shoulders, curling around the trees, obscuring the horizon. I could feel the presence beside me now. Something unseen, pressing lightly, brushing along the car. I dared not turn. The hum in the air matched my pulse. I exhaled again. The road beneath me rippled once more, alive, breathing, patient. The shadow between the leaning trees did not move away. It waited. The tires whispered against the wet asphalt. I pressed forward slowly. The highway stretched, the fog curled, the trees leaned, and the unseen watched. The night had not yet ended, and neither, it seemed, had whatever lingered in the folds of shadow and mist. The pines towered above me, dark and silent. Their needles rustled softly in the still air, though the wind had stopped hours ago. I set my small tent between two trees, the ground soft and damp beneath the canvas. Static crackled through the radio. At first, faint, just the hiss of white noise. Then words surfaced, fragmented, almost familiar. I leaned closer, but they dissolved into nothing, like they'd never been there. The fog drifted in thick columns around the trunks. It brushed my boots, seeped under the tent's flaps, curling against my skin. Cold moisture clung to my clothes. I felt it coil, almost breathing along with me. I tried to shake off the unease. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Footsteps circled, soft, deliberate, yet I saw nothing. The ground remained undisturbed. The hum returned, low, resonant, vibrating through the soil, rising into my chest. It wasn't wind. It wasn't anything I had ever heard. It existed here, in the space between the trees. I peeked outside the tent. Shadows shifted at the edges of the fog. never fully seen, always just at the limit of perception. I blinked. They didn't move away. They moved with me, circling, patient, silent. The radio hissed again, louder this time. A syllable floated, barely recognizable, as if spoken in a language I almost knew. The tent fabric trembled lightly under my fingers. I realized then that the forest was not just still, it was listening. I lay down, pulling the sleeping bag tight around my shoulders. The fog pressed at the tent, brushing like damp fingers against the canvas. I could hear footsteps circling, shifting, retreating, then closer again, echoing in the soil, soft but deliberate. A faint white light appeared between the trees. It moved slowly, weaving between trunks. Not like a flashlight, not like a star. Almost teasing, almost alive. I held my breath. The hum deepened. It vibrated in my chest, in my teeth, in the soles of my feet. The air smelled damp, earthy, metallic. Every inhale felt wet, heavy, strange. The footsteps grew closer, then paused. I didn't move. The forest held its own breath. I could feel it pressing against my skin, my bones, my mind. Another flicker of light between the trees. I blinked. It had shifted closer, just a few steps further into the clearing. The shadows stretched toward me. I imagined shapes leaning in, whispering, though no sound reached my ears. The radio pulsed again, static words brushing my consciousness. I almost recognized them, almost understood. A name, a syllable, a memory. Gone the moment I focused. I forced my eyes closed. The fog seeped into the edges of my vision, pale and moving. I could feel the presence all around, circling, patient, waiting. No one approached the tent. No one needed to. A soft rustle in the needles overhead. The light flickered one last time. Then nothing. Only the hum remained, low, vibrating, as if the earth itself had settled in. I lay there, still, listening to the fog curl around the pines, brushing against the tent. Every step, every whisper, every shadow had passed without need of touch. I understood that I was not alone, perhaps never had been. The night stretched long, thick with cold and fog. I couldn't see beyond the nearest trees, but I could feel the forest shifting, moving, alive in its silent way. The static hummed, low and insistent. The footsteps circled once more, and I realized I had nowhere to go. I closed my eyes, holding the sleeping bag tight. The fog curled. The hum resonated. The pines waited. And I listened. The forest breathed around me. Mist drifted low along the trail, coiling around the roots and moss. Every step I took pressed softly into the damp earth. A faint white light appeared between the trees. Not a lantern, not a star. It hovered, shifting slowly as though it knew I was watching. I stepped closer. The light moved just beyond reach, teasing me, pulsing softly in rhythm of the hum that vibrated through the forest. It brushed my skin with pale warmth, almost gentle, almost alive. The air thrummed in low frequencies. I could feel it in my chest, deep in my bones, vibrating with every heartbeat. Leaves quivered overhead, though no wind stirred them. The forest seemed to hum along, low and slow. I blinked. The light shifted, keeping a careful distance. It lingered between trunks, dancing along the edges of shadow. I tried to focus, but it blurred whenever I looked too long. The ground beneath me felt alive. Soft moss pressed against my boots. Roots twisted under the soil, stretching like silent fingers, waiting. Each step I took echoed faintly, swallowed by the dense, vibrating air. The mist thickened, curling around my ankles. It smelled faintly metallic, damp, like rain settling into stone. My breath fogged in small clouds, brushing my face. Fleeting, every inhalation brought a chill and a sense of watchfulness. I followed the light carefully, every sense alert. It pulsed slowly, teasing, almost communicating. I could feel a presence beside me, unseen yet unmistakable. The forest was aware of me, breathing around me, bending shadows toward the glow. A shape flickered in the corner of my vision. Not the light, something darker, long, thin, waiting just at the edge of perception. I dare not turn fully, but I could sense it, patient, unmoving, observing. The light shifted again. Closer now, floating between two pines. Its glow pulsed, brushing against my face, leaving a warmth that contrasted with the damp chill of the mist. I felt a pull, gentle but insistent, drawing me forward. The hum deepened, vibrating through the soles of my boots, through the arches of my feet, settling in my chest. It seemed to rise from the earth itself, a resonance that hummed in tandem with the pale light. I blinked. The path behind me had subtly shifted. Trees had moved. Branches twisted differently. The forest had rearranged itself while I wasn't looking. The light pulsed again, almost like a heartbeat. I felt my own heartbeat respond, slow and deliberate, drawn into its rhythm. The mist wrapped tighter around my legs, brushing like unseen hands. A soft rustle came from above. Leaves shimmered, though the air remained still. I could sense something moving in the darkness, circling, waiting. Not hostile, exactly, but patient. I stepped closer to the light. It retreated, hovering just out of reach. The hum vibrated through my ears, my teeth, my chest. It was quiet, but insistent, like the pulse of the forest itself. I reached out with a hand. The light shifted slightly, teasing, but never touching. I felt a thrill, soft, unsettling, like the forest had recognized my presence. The mist thickened further, obscuring the path. I could barely see my own feet, yet the light remained hovering, pulsing softly, a guide and a warning. I blinked once more. The light flickered, almost disappearing, then returned, pale and steady. Shapes shifted in the mist around it, indistinct, humanoid, but wrong. They didn't approach, but I felt them waiting. I stopped. The hum settled into a steady resonance in my chest. The pale light hovered, patient, almost expectant. I realized I could neither approach nor retreat fully. I exhaled slowly. The mist swirled around me. The light pulsed in quiet rhythm. The forest hummed, alive and attentive. And I walked forward, drawn by the glow, aware of every shadow, every whisper, every subtle movement. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. Fog curled along the asphalt, thick and deliberate. My headlights cut through it slowly, pale beams brushing the edges of the shoulder. I saw it then, a figure standing still on the roadside. Tall, thin, featureless, just a shadow, yet somehow alive. I blinked. It had not moved. When I looked away for a moment, it was closer than logic allowed. The hum of the tires over the asphalt was soft, muted, swallowed by the fog. Every breath I took was loud in the quiet. I could taste the dampness in the air, earthy and metallic. I slowed. The figure remained on the shoulder, just beyond the beams of the headlights. It didn't move like a person, not like a creature. It simply existed there, patient and observing. The fog thickened, curling around the car like smoke. Branches leaned toward the road, scraping softly against the roof. I could feel eyes, or something like them, tracking me from the trees. I blinked again. The shape had shifted closer. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to make my stomach twist. It moved in the spaces between my attention, deliberate and patient. A low hum surrounded me, soft, vibrating through the air, brushing against the tires, the mirrors, the steel of the doors. I could feel it pressing against my chest, almost syncing with my heartbeat. I wanted to speak, to ask it to move, to vanish, but no words came. The silence held me, heavier than the fog. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing, only fog, shadows, trees bending inward. The shape remained on the shoulder, always there, always waiting. The headlights flickered slightly. I thought I saw fingers, or the suggestion of limbs stretching beyond human form. I blinked. They were gone, but the sense of watching remained, anchored to the shoulder, patient and steady. The road curved slightly ahead. The tires whispered over wet asphalt, soft and hollow. I felt the car press forward, though my chest tightened. The figure seemed to lean subtly toward me, not moving, but present. Branches scratched softly against the sides of the car. The fog swirled like it had purpose, wrapping around the tires, coiling toward the wheel wells. A cold presence brushed against my shoulder, though nothing touched me. The hum deepened. It vibrated in my teeth, in my ears, in the soles of my boots. I blinked. The figure had moved again. Closer now, not far, but impossibly precise. I swallowed. The air tasted damp, metallic, heavy with the forest and the fog. I realized the shoulder had stretched unnaturally, bending the distance between us. Each blink betrayed the space, shortening it, drawing the shadow nearer. The road ahead seemed longer, deeper, impossible. I could see shapes shifting in the fog beyond the trees, tall and thin, echoing the figure's form. The low hum pulsed, almost guiding me forward, or warning me not to stop. I exhaled slowly. The figure remained silent, patient, waiting. I could not see its face. There were no features, but its presence pressed against the car. I pressed lightly on the wheel, moving forward. The tires whispered over the asphalt. The fog curled at the edges, brushing my legs, my shoulders, the mirrors. The figure stayed on the shoulder, and every time I looked away, it was closer, closer than I had allowed, closer than I wanted. I blinked again. The trees leaned inward, the fog thickened, and the hum resonated to the forest and the road alike. The figure remained, patient, waiting, silent, neither human nor animal. Something that existed between the spaces I could not name. I exhaled slowly, keeping my eyes on the headlights ahead. The road stretched forward, fog curling along the asphalt, shadows bending with the trees. The figure did not move, yet it pressed against the world like it belonged to the night. I drove on. The low hum followed me. The fog pressed at the tires, and the shape on the shoulder waited. The road stretched endlessly ahead, pale headlights cutting through the fog. Tires whispered against the wet asphalt. The night pressed close, thick, damp, like it had weight. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Shadows moved there that didn't belong. Not the trees, not the fog. They shifted with purpose, deliberate, intelligent, almost aware. I blinked. They were gone. I exhaled slowly. The air tasted cold, damp, metallic. I looked back again. The shadows returned, stretching along the edge of the road. Each movement felt intentional, patient, observing. They mirrored my own pace, yet did not follow my path. They existed independently, yet in relation to me. The fog curled along the tires, brushing against the car, curling like smoke around the mirrors. I could feel it moving in the corners of my vision. It was soft and alive, almost whispering against the metal. A low hum rose in the air, not from the engine, not from the tires. It vibrated in my chest, through the soles of my boots, in my ears, under my skin. The shadows shifted in rhythm, brushing against the fog. I pressed my hands lightly on the wheel. The tires whispered on the asphalt, soft and hollow. Branches leaned inward, scraping faintly against the car roof. I felt something behind me, brushing along the seat near my shoulder. I dared not turn. The shadows in the rear view moved closer, inching forward slowly. Blinking betrayed the distance. Each time my eyes closed, they shortened the gap. I realized they weren't just following. They were timing me, pacing me, testing me. I exhaled. The fog thickened. It swirled around the tires, brushed along the mirrors, and curled into the cracks of the car's metal. A faint chill brushed the back of my neck. I shivered. The shadows shifted again. They twisted in shapes that seemed humanoid, but wrong. Limbs too long, edges too sharp, moving in ways no body should. I blinked and they dissolved, leaving only the fog. But I knew they were still there. The road curved ahead, but the fog swallowed it immediately. I couldn't see beyond the headlights. Every bend stretched unnaturally, like the highway itself was alive, breathing, shifting. The hum deepened, vibrating softly through the car. It resonated with the shadows, brushing against the glass, echoing through the air. I could almost feel them whispering, almost hear syllables I didn't recognize. A movement in the fog caught my attention. Not ahead, not to the side. Behind, a shadow detached itself in the darkness, standing just beyond the reach of the headlights. I blinked. It was gone. The tires whispered along the asphalt. Branches scratched softly against the roof. Fog coiled around the mirrors and wheels. The shadows in the rear view lingered, deliberate, patient, pressing against the edges of perception. I pressed the pedal lightly. The road stretched longer. The fog thickened. The shadows moved in response, matching every shift of the car, every flicker of the headlights. I swallowed. The low hum vibrated in my chest, echoing through my bones. I realized I was not alone in the car. Or perhaps I had never been alone on this road. Another blink. The shadows shortened the distance again. Not aggressively, but inevitably, like the night itself had decided I must see them, must acknowledge them. They existed in the spaces I could not watch, in the edges of the fog, in the corners of my mind. The headlights cut through a bend. The fog seemed to part slightly, revealing the empty asphalt ahead, but the shadows remained. Not behind, not in front, always just at the edges of perception, waiting, patient. I exhaled slowly. Tires whispered, fog swirled, branches leaned. The hum vibrated through the car. The shadows in the rear view followed. Always, and I realized the night had no intention of letting me leave. The trail stretched ahead, narrow and uneven. The forest pressed close, tall trees bending over like silent guardians. The air was still, heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. A rustle came from the leaves. No wind stirred. The sound repeated, soft, deliberate, echoing between the trunks. I froze listening. Small lights blinked between the trees. Not fireflies, not lanterns. Pale, steady, almost teasing. They moved in rhythm with the rustling, vanishing whenever I reached for them. The temperature dropped suddenly. Cold pressed against my skin, damp and heavy, clinging to my clothes. I exhaled slowly. My breath curled into the air, small clouds of warmth in the chill. Shadows flitted at the edge of my vision, not full shapes, just suggestions of limbs or forms, moving too quickly to catch. I blinked. They disappeared, leaving only the dark spaces between the trunks. The ground beneath my boots felt soft and uneven. Roots twisted and coiled, like the forest itself was alive beneath my feet. Every step echoed softly, swallowed by the hush of the woods. Another rustle, closer this time. Leaves brushed together, yet no wind passed through. Something shifted in the shadows, careful, deliberate. I could feel it circling, patient, watching, though I couldn't see it fully. The lights blinked again, moving between the trees. They lingered just out of reach, teasing, almost alive. I took a step forward. They shifted away, maintaining a distance I couldn't close. I swallowed. The forest was aware of me. Every shadow, every rustle, every whisper of movement was deliberate and patient. The air tasted faintly metallic, damp and cold. A subtle hum vibrated beneath my feet. Soft at first, almost imperceptible. I felt it in my chest, resonating through my bones. It rose in low frequencies, blending with the rustling, the subtle movements. I stopped. The trail behind me seemed different. The trees had shifted, rearranged while I wasn't looking. The path stretched slightly longer, narrower, deeper into the forest. The lights flickered once more, a pale glow in the mist between trunks. I could feel their presence close, circling, not threatening but insistent, waiting. The rustling grew faintly louder. Closer again, brushing over leaves and needles. I held my breath. Every nerve was alive, aware of the movement around me. I blinked. Shapes flitted at the edges of perception, humanoid but wrong. Not fully seen, not fully formed. They moved like thoughts, quickly and deliberately, always just beyond focus. The hum pulsed softly now, rhythmic, steady, almost guiding. It vibrated through the soil, up through my boots, into my chest and shoulders. I could feel the forest itself humming in response, alive in ways I could not comprehend. Another step. The lights blinked again, teasing, moving ahead. I wanted to reach them. I wanted to know what followed. But each blink, each step, revealed only more questions. The temperature pressed lower still. Cold, damp, unyielding. The rustling persisted, surrounding me in a circle of sound that had no origin. Every shadow, every movement was patient. I exhaled slowly. The lights flickered one final time. The rustling soft and lingering, not leaving, but waiting. I realized I could see nothing fully, but I felt them, felt the forest pressing around me. Alive, aware, deliberate. I walked forward carefully, each step quiet, soft against the moss and soil. The rustling followed, always at the edge of hearing, circling, patient. The lights blinked in the mist, and I understood that the forest itself was alive, moving without wind, watching without eyes, waiting. The clearing opened suddenly between the trees. Mist curled along the edges, thick and slow. There, in the center, stood a camper, old, weathered, yet almost pristine. The doors hung ajar. A faint hum drifted from beneath the floorboards. I stepped closer, boots crunching softly on damp leaves. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on old iron. I pressed a hand against the door. It was cool, solid, heavier than I expected. Inside, everything looked untouched. The counters were clean, the cabinets shut tight, but it felt wrong. The hum rose slightly, low, vibrating to the floor and into my feet. I stepped inside slowly. Each movement made the wooden floor groan softly, though no one else was there. I blinked. Furniture shifted imperceptibly. Not far, not fast, just enough to catch the corner of my eye. The windows were fogged, pale light filtering through the mist outside. Shadows leaned along the walls, long, thin, stretching at impossible angles. I realized the camper was not empty. Something moved behind me, patient, silent. I want to call out. The words caught in my throat. No sound escaped. Only the hum resonated, low and persistent. I stepped toward the floorboards. The hum grew louder, vibrating to the soles of my boots, into my chest. I could feel it in my teeth, in my ears, a resonance that pressed against my skull. A whisper, soft, deliberate. My name, not fully spoken, but close enough to make my skin crawl. I froze, hands hovering over the cool wood. I blinked. The shadows shifted. Furniture moved slightly when I looked away, subtle, deliberate. The air inside tasted faintly bitter, damp, and metallic. The mist outside pressed against the windows. It curled around the camper, brushing against the roof, seeping under the door. I could feel it inside the small space, coiling lightly along the floor. I took a step back. The hum persisted low, insistent, vibrating through everything. I realized then that the camper had been waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to enter. Another whisper, closer this time. A syllable broken, almost familiar. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it lingered, curling around my skull. Something breathed behind me, deliberate, slow, almost patient. I turned slowly, just enough to feel it. Nothing visible, only the empty space of the room. And yet the feeling remained, warm, pressing, alive. It did not move toward me, but it was there, always there. I glanced around the camper. Everything inside was too perfect, too still. The plates, the counters, the small stove, they were clean, lifeless. The hum vibrated through them all, connecting every object to the same pulse. I swallowed. The mist outside thickened, curling like fingers along the tires of the camper. Branches scratched softly against the metal, though the air was still. The whisper came again, faint, curling along the edges of perception. I stepped toward the door. The floorboards groaned softly. The hum pulsed beneath my boots. I exhaled slowly. A final glance inside. The camper remained pristine, untouched, yet alive. The shadows lingered at the edges. The hum thrummed softly, and the whisper drifted, patient, deliberate, unfinished. I stepped outside. The mist pressed against my legs, damp and cold. The clearing seemed smaller, tighter, alive in its own quiet way. The camper waited silently behind me, doors ajar, humming softly, as though it had never intended to let me leave untouched. I walked back toward the trail. Leaves crunched underfoot, mist wrapped around my ankles. The hum faded slowly, curling upward into the fog, but never fully gone. And somewhere beneath the floorboards, I could still feel the whisper of my name. The highway rose above the forest, the overpass cutting through fog like a pale scar. Concrete pressed under my tires, damp and cold. The air smelled of wet asphalt and something older, faintly metallic. I glanced over the edge. Pairs of glowing eyes stared up at me from the darkness below. They didn't blink. They didn't move. Just watched. The headlights barely reached the edge of the fog. The eyes glimmered, reflecting pale light. Too many to count, too still to be natural. A low scraping followed me as I drove up the ramp. Metal against metal, slow, deliberate. Not the guardrails, not the road. Something unseen, moving alongside the overpass, echoing with intent. The fog wrapped around the tires, curling like smoke. Branches brushed against the car, though the wind was still. I could feel it pressing against the mirrors, brushing lightly along the hood. I exhaled slowly. The eyes remained patient, steady, unblinking. I blinked. When I looked again, there were more than before. Pairs of light floating in the darkness, observing, waiting. The scraping continued. Soft, rhythmic, deliberate. It rose slightly, higher in pitch, then faded. Yet I could feel it lingering, brushing along the metal of the car like a presence. I slowed. Tires whispered against the damp asphalt. The headlights cut through the fog in narrow beams. The eyes didn't move, but I felt them shift subtly, tracking, adjusting, watching with intent. Branches leaned inward. Shadows stretched along the overpass walls. Something hovered at the edges of perception, just beyond vision, patient, deliberate. I pressed lightly on the wheel. The scraping rose again, faint, brushing against something unseen. The fog thickened at the edges of the headlights. A chill pressed against my skin, damp and clinging. I blinked. One pair of eyes seemed closer. Not brighter, not larger, just nearer. A shape leaned slightly in the darkness, tall, thin, unnaturally still. The low hum returned, vibrating through the tires, through the metal, into my chest. I could feel it through my teeth, my ears, my skull. It pulsed softly, in rhythm with the scraping, with the gaze of the eyes below. I glanced back. Nothing. The road stretched empty behind me. Fog curling along the asphalt. Yet the feeling of being observed pressed harder, heavier, anchored by the eyes below. I exhaled slowly. Branches scraped softly against the roof. The fog swirled around the guardrails, brushing along the edges of the overpass. I could feel the shapes shifting slightly in the mist, patient, deliberate, just beyond sight. A blink. The nearest eyes seemed to move slightly, though nothing in the dark shifted. The scraping rose again, brushing softly, deliberate, echoing across the concrete. I swallowed, tasting damp metal and pine. I pressed forward. The overpass stretched longer than it should, the fog thickening at the edges. The eyes remained below, unblinking, patient. The scraping faded slightly but lingered, brushing the edges of the mind. I realized the overpass was not merely a road. It was a threshold. The fog, the eyes, the scraping. They were waiting for passage, watching each step, observing every heartbeat. I exhaled slowly. The headlights illuminated nothing but fog, asphalt, and the glowing eyes. Branches leaned closer. Shadows stretched along the walls, thin, deliberate. The scraping echoed faintly again, a reminder that I was not alone. I continued forward. The tires whispered on the damp concrete. The hum vibrated softly in my chest. The eyes waited below, glowing in silent patience. And as I reached the center of the overpass, I realized the forest, the fog, the road itself, and the unseen watchers were all aware of me, listening, observing, waiting. Fog wrapped the clearing like a thick, wet blanket. It pressed against my skin, curling around my boots and legs, damp and heavy. The trees loomed beyond, dark and silent, their trunks fading into the white haze. Shapes emerged within the fog, humanoid, wrong in subtle ways. They moved slowly, dissolving into mist when I looked directly. Yet I could feel them there, watching, waiting. Each breath I took was cold and wet. I exhaled slowly, watching it curl and vanish into the fog. The air tasted metallic, damp, pressing against my lungs. The ground beneath me was soft and uneven, roots twisted underfoot like coiled fingers. Every step seemed to sink slightly, as if the fog had substance, almost alive. I could hear whispers, faint and unintelligible, curling along the mist. Not words I recognized, but close enough to unsettle. Soft footsteps pressed near, though I could see nothing moving. A low hum vibrated through the air. I felt it in my chest, in my teeth, under the soles of my boots. It pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, soft but insistent, almost guiding. The humanoid shapes emerged again. Tall, thin, and wrong. Limbs too long, torsos bending impossibly. They hovered, half-formed, dissolving into fog, yet somehow solid in intent. I swallowed. The fog swirled around me, thickening, curling higher along my legs and chest. It pressed against my shoulders, coiled around my arms, almost tactile. I exhaled again, slow, careful. The shapes shifted as I moved, maintaining distance, patient and deliberate. I could feel them circling, wrapping the clearing in their quiet presence. A whisper rose through the fog, closer now, not fully intelligible. A single syllable lingered in my ears. I could feel it brushing the edges of my mind, curling around my skull. The trees bent slightly toward the clearing. Branches stretched into the fog, scraping softly against one another. A subtle movement in the mist caught my eye. Another shape, humanoid but wrong, gliding just above the ground. The low hum deepened. It vibrated through the soles of my boots, through my chest, brushing along the spine. The fog seemed to pulse with it, thickening and curling as though it breathed with the rhythm. I stepped carefully, each footfall soft on the damp earth. The shapes did not approach. They simply moved with me, patient, observing, deliberate. The fog swallowed the trail behind me, erasing it as if I had never walked there. A chill pressed against my face. I realized the fog wasn't just mist. It was a presence, alive, aware, swallowing sound and light alike. Every inhale tasted metallic. Every exhale vanished into nothing. Another blink. The humanoid shapes shifted, almost communicating in the spaces between their half-formed forms. They swayed slightly, bending at impossible angles, yet never touching. The low hum resonated, guiding, pressing, insisting. I tried to call out softly. No sound escaped. Only the fog responded, curling tighter, almost brushing against my ears with intent. I moved forward slowly. The clearing stretched, but only just enough to keep the shapes at the edges of perception. Their presence filled the fog, thick and patient. I could feel eyes, though none were visible, following my every movement. The fog thickened around my shoulders, brushing like damp fingers. It pressed against the back of my neck, coiled around my ankles. The humanoid form shifted with it, patient, deliberate, impossibly still. I exhaled slowly, careful, measured. The hum vibrated softly through the ground. The shapes moved in rhythm with it, circling, waiting, patient. The fog swallowed my voice, my trail, my breath, and I realized I was completely alone, yet not alone at all. The hollow fog pressed, the shapes lingered, and the low hum resonated through everything. I kept walking, each step slow, deliberate. The fog thickened, coiling, swallowing, watching, and I understood that the forest, the mist, and the figures within it would not let me leave untouched. The trail stretched ahead, marked but quiet. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in thin, pale beams, cutting soft patterns on the dirt. Leaves rustled faintly, though the air was still. I took a step forward. Then another. Something felt different. The path behind me no longer matched memory. Trees had shifted. Branches leaned at angles that hadn't been there moments ago. Roots twisted where none had existed. The trail narrowed, deeper into the forest than it should have been. A faint glow appeared ahead. Pale, steady, almost teasing. It hovered between the trunks, brushing lightly against the fog that lingered low along the forest floor. I blinked. When I looked again, the trail seemed to stretch slightly longer, bending in impossible ways. The trees pressed inward, bending subtly toward the path. I could feel the forest itself guiding me forward, patient, deliberate. Leaves rustled without wind. Small shapes flitted at the edge of vision. Too quick to catch, too deliberate to be accidental. I exhaled slowly, tasting damp earth and metallic hints in the air. The glow shifted closer. It pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat. I felt my own pulse quicken in response, synchronized with its rhythm. The forest hummed faintly in resonance. I stepped carefully, each footfall soft, muffled by moss and fallen needles. The trail narrowed further, twisting in ways that felt unnatural. Every step I took erased a part of what had been behind me. I glanced back. The path I had walked vanished into mist. The glow hovered, patient. The forest around it seemed alive, bending subtly, pressing in. Branches brushed the sides of my arms, faint, almost intentional. Shadows twisted along the edges of perception, waiting just beyond focus. I blinked. Something shifted in the trees beside me, a shape, thin and tall, bending in impossible angles. It did not move closer, yet I felt it beside me, circling patient. The hum deepened slightly. Low, resonant, brushing against my chest, my ears, the soles of my boots. I exhaled, careful not to disturb the rhythm. The forest seemed to breathe in sync, the mist curling like smoke around my ankles. The glow pulsed again, almost teasing. It was neither threatening nor inviting, just aware. Every step toward it felt deliberate, as though I were following a presence that existed in the gaps between sight and sound. Leaves rustled softly overhead. I could feel shapes moving in the corners of my vision, humanoid, wrong, but not fully solid. They did not approach, but they circled patient, deliberate. The forest held its own breath. I stepped forward again. The path stretched impossibly, bending, curving, deeper than it should have gone. The glow floated slightly ahead, pulsing softly, a guide and a warning. The air pressed damp and metallic against my skin. I exhaled slowly. Branches scraped faintly against one another. Shadows stretched along the trunks of trees, thin, deliberate. The forest seemed to rearrange itself with every blink, every step I took. I glanced back once more. The trail I had walked was gone. Mist filled the space where the path had been. Only the glow remained ahead. I felt eyes, or a suggestion of them, watching from every shadow, from every fold in the mist. Not hostile exactly, but patient, aware, deliberate. The forest pressed closer, shaping the path forward, circling, observing. I swallowed. The glow pulsed gently, brushing lightly against the fog, almost breathing. I realized I could neither go back nor fully stop. The trail had vanished. I was being led. I exhaled slowly. Step by step, the forest guided me. Mist coiled around my legs. Shadows lingered in the corners. The glow pulsed in quiet rhythm. And I walked forward, deeper into the forest, aware of every shift, every subtle movement, every soft rustle without wind. The forest opened to a clearing. In the distance, a tall structure rose against the fog. A radio tower, skeletal and humming, its outline blurred in the mist, pale lights moving along its metal frame. I stepped closer. Each footfall pressed softly into the damp earth. The hum vibrated through the soles of my boots, rising through my chest, resonating in my skull. It was not the wind, not the tower itself. The sound existed in the space between low and insistent. The mist clung to the ground, curling around the roots and rocks. It brushed against my ankles, cold and damp. I could feel the forest pressing in from all sides, patient, deliberate. The tower's lights move along the structure like living things, not random, not mechanical, slow, deliberate, almost breathing. Each pulse of light echoed in the fog, illuminating shapes just beyond vision. I blinked. Shadows swayed in the mist. They were thin, tall, humanoid, wrong in subtle ways. They did not approach, but they observed, circling in quiet patience. The hum deepened. It resonated through the metal, through the fog, into my chest. I could feel it in my teeth, in my ears, under my skin. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate, brushing against my mind. I stepped closer to the tower. The ground hummed beneath my feet, each step vibrating softly into the soles of my boots. The fog thickened at the edges, curling higher, brushing against my legs. Every inhale tasted metallic, damp, cold. The lights moved again, slower now, almost teasing. Each pulse caught on the edges of the fog, illuminating pale shapes that dissolved when I focused. I realized the tower itself was not just metal and light. It was alive, patient, deliberate, aware. Branches scraped softly against one another. Shadows stretched along the mist. Something moved in the corners of perception. Humanoid, wrong, watching. I could feel them circling, patient, deliberate. The hum pulsed again, synchronized with my heartbeat. It rose slightly, higher in pitch, resonating in my chest and skull. The fog shifted with it, coiling and curling like smoke around unseen fingers. I exhaled slowly. The air pressed damp and cold against my skin. The lights on the tower flickered, then moved, brushing along the metal, deliberate. I realized I was being observed, not just by the shadows and the fog, but by the structure itself. The ground beneath me seemed to shift subtly, roots twisted beneath the soil, curling like waiting hands. The mist wrapped tighter around my ankles, brushing lightly, almost tactile. I felt the presence of something behind me, patient, silent, but undeniably there. A blink. When I looked again, the lights on the tower had shifted slightly, aligning differently with the fog. The shadows moved in response, circling, patient, deliberate. The hum pulsed softly, echoing in the metal, in the mist, in the forest. I swallowed. The forest pressed closer, the fog coiled higher, brushing against my arms. The lights pulsed again, brighter, illuminating more shapes, tall, thin, humanoid, wrong. They did not approach, but they were aware, observing, synchronized with a hum. I stepped closer. The mist thickened, curling along my legs, brushing against the boots, climbing higher. The hum rose in resonance, vibrating in rhythm with the tower's pulse. It was patient, deliberate, aware. I exhaled slowly. Step by step, I moved closer to the structure. The forest waited, the fog curled, the shadows observed. And the tower hummed, alive in quiet rhythm, pulsing through everything. I realized in the light, the fog, the hum, and the shadows were all connected, all aware of me, patient, deliberate, waiting. I stopped. The mist pressed against my shoulders, cold and damp. The lights on the tower pulsed slowly, deliberately, a heartbeat in the fog. The shadows lingered at the edges of perception. The hum resonated softly through the forest, the ground, and my chest. And I understood that whatever this place was, it had not yet intended to let me leave untouched. Morning arrived quietly. Mist hung low along the highway, curling around the tires like soft fingers. The air was damp, cold, heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and pine. I stepped out of the car. Fog wrapped around my boots, cold and clinging. Every breath I took hung in the air, small clouds vanishing slowly. And then I saw them. Footprints. Not mine. Too long, too thin, perfectly spaced alongside the car. They led forward, matching my path, silent in the mist. I bent down, tracing the edges with a finger. The impressions were shallow, yet precise. No sound accompanied them. No movement. Just the fog, the asphalt, and the silent tracks. I swallowed. The low hum from the forest and night before seemed to linger in the air, soft, vibrating beneath my boots. I could feel it in my chest, brushing lightly along the soles of my feet. The fog shifted slightly. It curled around the tires, coiling, brushing the car. Branches leaned in along the roadside, shadows stretching thin and deliberate. I took a cautious step forward. The footprints continued, never faltering, always beside the car. I blinked. When I looked again, they seemed closer, as if the fog had carried them forward. A subtle movement at the edge of perception. Shadows bent along the trees, thin and humanoid, wrong in subtle ways. I felt them circling, patient, deliberate, silent. The air pressed cold and metallic against my skin. Every inhale tasted damp, earthy, like the fog itself had substance. The mist pressed around my ankles, curling, coiling, aware. I traced another footprint with my eyes. They were impossibly precise. Even spacing, identical depth, silent. I realized then that they had been there while I slept, while I drove, perhaps always. A soft rustle in the leaves. Not wind, just the forest moving around the fog, bending shadows closer. Shapes shifted in the mist. I could feel them, patient, deliberate, watching. I exhaled slowly. The footprints continued alongside the car, leading forward. I pressed lightly on the pavement with my boots. They did not shift, did not falter, just remained, perfectly aligned, silent in the fog. I turned to look at the road behind me. Mist filled the space where I had arrived. No footprints. Nothing but pale fog curling along the asphalt. I blinked. The footprints were still beside the car, unchanged, patient. The forest seemed to lean closer. Branches stretched inward. Shadows twisted in impossible angles. Then, deliberate, observing. I swallowed again, feeling the cold press into my chest. The hum from the tower, from the clearing, from the fog, seemed to linger in resonance. It vibrated beneath my feet, through my boots, brushing along my spine. I exhaled, careful, slow. The mist coiled around the tires, curling lightly against the car doors. The footprints remained, perfectly aligned, silent, and deliberate. I pressed forward along the road. Each step echoed softly in the fog, swallowed immediately. The footprints followed, patient, impossibly precise. I realized they had no sound of their own. The forest seemed to watch, shadows stretching at the edges of vision. The fog pressed higher around the tires, brushing against my legs. Every inhale tasted damp, metallic, unnatural. Every exhale vanished instantly. I stopped, leaning lightly against the car. The footprints remained beside it, silent, patient, deliberate. The fog thickened, curling around the tires, brushing against my shoulders. The hum resonated softly, vibrating through the air, the ground, my chest. And I understood. The footprints had been there all along. They were patient. They were deliberate. They were waiting. I exhaled slowly. The fog curled. The hum persisted. And the silent, impossibly perfect footprints walked beside me, unseen but undeniably present. The forest thinned slightly. A small cabin emerged, half hidden among the trees, wood weathered and dark. Its windows glimmered faintly in the mist. It beckoned. I stepped closer, boots pressing softly into the damp ground. The air smelled faintly of pine and decay, sharp and metallic. Mist curled around my ankles, brushing against my legs, reluctant to let me pass. The door hung slightly open. A low hum vibrated through the frame, brushing my chest, resonating softly through the soles of my boots. I pushed it further and stepped inside. Walls hummed quietly, murmuring in a language almost familiar. I blinked, startled. Furniture shifted slightly as I looked away. Chairs tilted, tables adjusted, subtle and deliberate. The floorboards groaned underfoot, soft and uneven. A faint breeze stirred the curtains, though no wind reached inside. I could feel something behind me, patient, watching. I pressed a hand against the wall. Cool, smooth, almost wet. The hum deepened, vibrating in the air, in my teeth, in my ears. It pulsed slowly, deliberate, resonating with my heartbeat. I turned carefully. Shadows lingered at the edges of vision. Humanoid, wrong, shifting subtly with every blink. No sound, no movement, yet the sense of presence pressed against me, close and patient. A whisper curled along the walls. Soft, almost a word, almost a name. I blinked. The furniture shifted again, subtle, careful, deliberate. Mist pressed lightly through the cracks, coiling along the floorboards. I stepped forward slowly. Every footfall echoed, swallowed immediately by the air. The hum rose slightly, synchronized with my breath. I felt it deep in my chest, brushing against my ribs, threading into my skull. The shadows shifted with it, circling, patient, deliberate. I pressed a hand to my ears, swallowing. The whisper persisted, curling closer, brushing the edge of my mind. I realized the cabin itself was alive, aware, responding to my presence. I exhaled slowly, careful. The fog outside pressed against the windows, wrapping the cabin in soft cold. The hum pulsed gently, vibrating through walls, floor, and air. The shadows lingered, half-seen, patient. I stepped back toward the door. The hum lingered. The whispers persisted. Mist coiled around my boots, brushing my legs as I moved. The cabin breathed with a deliberate rhythm, waiting, observing. And I realized I was not alone. The cabin had been listening, waiting, patient. And it would not let me leave untouched. Above the treetops, pale and still, a figure floated. Limbs stretched unnaturally, bending in ways no body should. It hovered, silent, deliberate, almost mocking. I could not look away. Legs felt heavy, slow, unresponsive. The forest pressed inward, shadows stretching thin, deliberate, patient. Mist curled around the treetops, brushing softly along branches. The pale figure remained, motionless, weightless. Every blink revealed it in a slightly different angle, closer, slower, deliberate. A low hum resonated through the clearing, brushing my chest, vibrating in my skull. Leaves whisper without wind, rustling in rhythm with the figure above. I stepped forward carefully, each footfall soft. Mist pressed around my ankles. The figure floated closer, though it did not descend. It observed, patient, deliberate, impossible. Branches scraped softly against one another. Shadows twisted along trunks. Humanoid, wrong, moving subtly. I blinked. The figure shifted slightly, defying logic, floating nearer in impossible grace. The forest hummed with resonance, the figure pulsed in rhythm with the mist. I could feel its presence, pressing against the air, threading into my chest. Every inhale tasted damp and metallic. I exhaled slowly. Step by step, I moved forward, compelled, aware. The figure floated above, limbs stretching, silent, patient, deliberate. I realized then that the forest and the figure were aligned, waiting. Shadows blinked in the darkness. Rust-colored eyes glimmered, fleeting, impossible catch. They vanished when approached, only to reappear moments later. A low hum filled the air. It vibrated through mist, through the trees, brushing my chest, threading into my skull. The shadows circled, patient, deliberate. I could feel them pressing close, but never touching. Each blink revealed them closer than before. Leaves rustled without wind. Mist coiled along my legs, brushing lightly against boots and sleeves. The eyes followed, glowing in rhythm with the hum. I exhaled slowly, careful. Branches leaned in subtly, scraping against one another, echoing softly. The forest seemed alive with intent. Shadows bending, pulsing, patient. Step by step, I moved forward. The eyes blinked, vanished, and reappeared. The humming grew louder, almost a heartbeat in the fog. I blinked. The shadows circled deliberately, threading closer. The air tasted metallic, damp, cold. I realized the eyes were never still, never alone. The forest watched. The fog coiled, and the rust-colored eyes lingered, deliberate, patient, impossibly present. The highway stretched into nothing. Headlights cut through fog thick and unyielding. Every mile seemed longer than the last. The asphalt rippled beneath the tires, soft and deliberate, like the road itself was breathing. Shadows lingered at the edge of the headlights. Shapes too fleeting to recognize, bending, stretching impossible angles. Each blink revealed them closer, pressing against the edges of perception. The fog curled along the tires, soft and tactile, brushing against the wheel wells. Branches leaned inward. The forest pressed on both sides, silent and patient. A low hum vibrated in the air. It resonated in my chest, through my spine, brushing my teeth. Every breath tasted damp and metallic. I blinked. Shapes moved in the fog. Not random, deliberate, like they had been waiting for me. I exhaled slowly, careful. The road stretched impossibly long. Every turn revealed another bend, another stretch, never ending. Headlights caught glimpses of figures at the edge of the road, vanishing when approached. I swallowed. The hum deepened, echoing with the rhythm of my heartbeat. Fog coiled around the tires, curling upward, brushing the mirrors. Shadows flitted alongside, patient, deliberate. I pressed the pedal lightly. The asphalt whispered beneath the tires. Shapes appeared at the edges of vision. Blink, gone. Blink, closer. I realized then that the highway itself had intentions. It stretched, it waited, it observed. The fog, the shapes, the asphalt, they existed to guide me, or to trap me. The headlights illuminated nothing but endless gray. Shadows leaned from the forest, stretching toward the tires. Branches scraped softly against the roof. And I exhaled slowly, aware that the night had no plan of letting me leave untouched. I stopped beneath the bridge. Fog pressed thick along the water below. The air tasted metallic and damp. Puddles reflected pale light. Whispers curled along the underside of the concrete. Static, broken words, my name drifting through the mist. I could feel it brushing against the nape of my neck, curling through my skull. Shadows shifted along the walls, elongated and thin. They bent impossibly, moving just beyond sight. Every blink revealed more shapes, patient, deliberate. My reflection in the puddles moved wrong. Slightly delayed, slightly twisted. It mirrored my movements, but not fully. A low hum vibrated in the air. It resonated through the water, the concrete, my boots. The fog coiled lightly, brushing my ankles. Branches scraped softly above the edge of the bridge. Shapes leaned in the mist. I could feel them circling, deliberate, patient, observing. I exhaled slowly. The whispers rose slightly, curling around my ears. Static words, almost comprehensible, almost names. Every breath pressed cold against my lungs. I stepped forward, careful. Puddles rippled without wind. The reflections distorted. Shapes gliding beneath the surface. Fog thickened around the bridge supports. The whispers lingered, low and insistent. Shadows shifted with a hum, patient and deliberate. And I understood that the bridge, the fog, the reflections, and the whispers were all alive. I exhaled slowly. Step by step, I moved forward. The fog coiled higher. The whispers pressed closer. The shadows circled. And the night had no intention of letting me leave untouched. Small forms watched me from the undergrowth. Humanoid, thin, wrong in subtle ways. Their eyes were like glass marbles, catching pale light. Blink. Gone. Blink. Closer. The forest hummed low, vibrating under my boots. Mist curled around roots and branches, brushing my ankles, wrapping around my legs. I exhaled slowly. Every rustle, every movement, pressed deliberate and patient against my awareness. The shapes circled, never approaching, always observing. The glass eyes reflected the pale light of fog and mist. I could feel them threading into my mind, observing, patient. I swallowed. Branches scraped against one another. Shadows twisted in impossible angles. I could feel the eyes behind me, beside me, circling, aware. Step by step, I moved forward. The forest pressed inward. The glass eyes lingered, deliberate, patient, impossibly present. The hum of the earth beneath resonated softly, threading through my chest. I exhaled slowly. The forms faded into the mist. The eyes remained, watching, waiting. Mist rose in unnatural columns. It coiled upward, curling around trunks and rocks. The air hummed low, vibrating through the soil, my boots, my chest. Shadows swayed inside the mist. Humanoid, wrong, never fully visible. They communicated in movement, subtle shifts, deliberate circles. The hum deepened, resonating with each breath. I felt it thread through my teeth, my ears, my skull. Mist brushed my arms, damp, cold, aware. I exhaled slowly. Branches leaned inward. The forest bent around the mist, patient, deliberate. Blink. Shapes shifted. Blink. The mist pulsed. Step by step, I moved forward. Every movement erased my trail. Every inhale tasted metallic, damp, alive. The shadows inside the mist swayed again. They moved in rhythm with the hum, deliberate, patient. I could feel their attention curling around me. The mist thickened at my shoulders. It pressed soft and cold, brushing along my skin. The forest hummed with it. I could hear whispers curling in the air, subtle, almost intelligible. Step by step, I walked forward. The mist pulsed. The shadows swayed. The hum threaded through everything. And I understood. It would not let me leave untouched. Fog lay over the lake. Smooth, glassy. Ripples radiated outward, though no wind moved the water. A pale humanoid figure stood silently at the edge. Reflection showed nothing. I blinked. The figure remained, elongated, limbs bending subtly, unnaturally. The forest hummed low. Mist curled along the shoreline, brushing my boots, pressing damp and cold against my legs. I could feel the presence of something patient, deliberate, watching. I exhaled slowly. Branches scraped softly. Shadows twisted at the edges of perception. Step by step, I moved closer. The figure remained still, silent, unblinking. I could feel it pressing into the space around me. The low hum vibrated through the earth. The mist, the water. Every breath tasted metallic, damp, cold. Shapes flitted in the fog. Thin, humanoid, wrong. I blinked. The figure shifted subtly, floating just above the water, patient, deliberate. I realized the forest, the fog, and the figure were all aligned, all aware. Step by step, I walked forward. The figure remained, waiting, patient, deliberate. Car lights caught movement in the trees. Faint forms glimpsed, then gone. Blink, vanished. Static whisper my name from nowhere. The air tasted metallic, damp, cold. Mist curled along the tires, brushing lightly. Branches leaned inward. Shadows stretched along trunks, thin, deliberate, patient. Every blink revealed forms closer than before. I exhaled slowly. Footsteps circled softly in the mist, yet I could see nothing. The lights flickered again, vanished again. The hum threaded softly through the fog. Shapes moved at the edge of perception, patient, deliberate, observing. I realized I could neither follow nor escape them. The night pressed inward. The fog thickened, and the static whispered my name again. The road stretched empty, fog curling along the asphalt. Headlights reflected a figure in the distance. I thought I was alone. I was not. The tires whispered on wet asphalt. Mist coiled around my boots, brushing ankles, climbing slowly. Branches scraped softly against the car. Shadows twisted in impossible angles. A low hum vibrated through the air, through the metal, into my chest. The figure remained at the edge of the headlights. Patient, deliberate. It did not move closer, but I could feel it pressing into the space around me. I blinked. The fog thickened. It wrapped along the tires, coiled around the mirrors, brushing the car like waiting fingers. Static whispered softly, my name curling along the edges of perception. Shadows circled the highway, thin, deliberate, patient. Step by step, I pressed forward. The tires whispered. Fog pressed higher. The figure remained. And I understood the night never intended to let me leave.